Let's be real, we're living in a world completely awash in data, and it holds these incredible promises, right? Curing diseases, building smarter cities, you name it. But, and it's a huge but, to get those benefits, we have to share our data, and that just feels risky. So that's the giant paradox we're stuck in. How do we learn all these amazing things from our collective data without exposing the deeply personal secrets of any single one of us? Okay, so here's the plan. First, we're going to tear down why our old-school ideas about privacy are totally broken. Then, we'll uncover a powerful new promise, get into its secret sauce, which is all about randomness, figure out what it really guarantees, and finally, get into why this is one of the most important ideas in our modern world.
All right, so for the longest time, we've basically put all our eggs in one basket to keep data safe, this idea called anonymization. But as we're about to see, that idea is, well, it's pretty much a myth.
This is the question, isn't it? It feels like this constant battle. On one side, you have all these breakthroughs just waiting to happen if we can analyze huge amounts of data. On the other, you have us, wanting to make sure our sensitive, personal info stays exactly that, personal.
I mean, the potential upside is just massive. Think about how we discovered that smoking causes cancer, a world-changing insight that only happened by studying people's health data. But here's the flip side. If you're in that dataset, you're exposed. It could lead to something like your insurance rates going up or who knows what else, real harm, just because your data was part of a study.
So for years, the standard playbook was to anonymize data. You just go in, you strip out the obvious stuff like names and social security numbers, and voila, the data's safe. The problem is that gives us a totally false and honestly a dangerous sense of security. Take this classic, famous example. A while back, Netflix released this massive, supposedly anonymized dataset of what movies people rated, all for a public competition. Well, it took researchers almost no time at all to prove it wasn't anonymous in the slightest. By simply cross-referencing the Netflix data with public ratings on IMDb, they could easily re-identify specific people and see their entire private viewing history.
And this goes way beyond your movie taste. In another case, the governor of Massachusetts had his anonymized hospital records exposed. How? An attacker just took that health data, which still had his birth date, zip code, and sex, and matched it with public voter records. Boom. The supposedly anonymous patient was instantly unmasked. It gets even worse. An attacker doesn't even need a second data set to pull this off. They can use something called a differencing attack. Let's say they know you're in a specific database. They can ask a really broad question like, hey, how many people in here have the sickle cell trait? And they get an answer, 107. Then they ask the exact same question, but this time they say, everyone except for Mr. X. The answer comes back, 106. Well, guess what? With a little third-grade math, they've just exposed your private health status.
Okay, so if scrubbing data is a total bust, what do we do? Well, this leads us to a completely different way of thinking, a new approach that redefines the entire goal of privacy. And this is the big aha moment. Anonymization fails because it's trying to make the data itself safe. But differential privacy flips the whole script. It asks, what if we stopped worrying about the data and instead focused on making the analysis of the data safe? It's a huge shift in thinking, moving the guarantee away from the dataset and onto the questions you ask it.
This right here is the radical promise of differential privacy. It's not a vague promise about your data being safe. It's a direct guarantee made to you. It says that no matter what, the outcome of any analysis will be basically the same whether your data is in there or not. You cannot be harmed because you chose to participate.
So the absolute key takeaway here is this. Differential privacy isn't a thing you do to data. It's a mathematical property of the algorithm you use to analyze it. It's a guarantee that if you run a query, and then you run that same query again, but with my data removed, the two answers will be so statistically similar that you can't tell I was ever there. My individual data point doesn't move the needle. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. That sounds great, like maybe too good to be true. How is it even possible to get useful answers while making a guarantee that strong? Well, it's not magic, it's math.
The secret sauce here is injecting a very specific, carefully calibrated amount of statistical noise into the answers. It's just enough noise to create a smokescreen around any one person's data, but not so much noise that it messes up the useful patterns for the entire group.
A really cool and simple way to see this in action is a technique called randomized response. Imagine I ask you a really sensitive, maybe embarrassing question. Instead of answering directly, you follow these steps with a couple of coins. Half the time, you'll end up telling the truth. The other half of the time, your answer is completely random, decided by that second coin flip.
What this does is it gives every single person perfect, plausible deniability. If you answer yes, nobody, not even me, the person asking, can know for sure if you're telling the truth or if you just happen to get heads on your coins. Your personal privacy is totally protected. But, and this is the magic, when a researcher gets thousands of these noisy answers, they can use statistics to subtract out all that randomness and get a remarkably accurate picture of the group as a whole.
So we've got this incredibly powerful promise. But like any guarantee, it's super important to read the fine print, right? Let's get really clear on what differential privacy does, and just as importantly, what it does not protect you from.
Differential privacy absolutely protects you from any harm that comes from your participation in a database. It shuts down those linkage attacks we talked about and gives you that plausible deniability. But here's what it can't do. It can't hide a general truth about a group you belong to. If a study finds that smoking causes cancer, that new fact might affect you if you're a smoker. The key, though, is that differential privacy guarantees the study would have come to the exact same conclusion whether your specific data was in it or not.
And this just shows how rigorous the math behind this is. Privacy isn't just some vague on or off switch. It's treated like a quantifiable budget. Think of it like a bank account. Every time someone asks a question, it spends a tiny bit of the privacy budget. This means you can track and control the privacy loss over many, many queries. And, this part is brilliant, once an answer is released, you can't make it less private just by staring at it or thinking about it really hard.
Okay, so this is obviously a really clever, really powerful idea from the world of computer science. But why should the rest of us actually care?
We should care because the ability to trust the process of data analysis is becoming fundamental to how our society works. I'm talking about everything from the US Census to tracking global pandemics. We need a way to learn from our collective information without forcing every one of us to give up our individual right to privacy.
You know, there's this fundamental tension in information. If you ask enough questions and demand perfectly accurate answers every time, you will inevitably destroy all privacy. It's a mathematical certainty. The whole point of differential privacy isn't to pretend that law doesn't exist. It's to manage it, to fight a brilliant delaying action, squeezing out as much useful knowledge as we can before that privacy budget finally runs out.
Look, it's not a silver bullet that solves every single problem, but it gives us something that old-school anonymization never, ever could. A formal, provable, and tough-as-nails framework for managing that deep conflict between utility and privacy. And that's exactly why huge organizations from the US Census Bureau all the way to Apple are using it as their gold standard.
So, as more and more of our lives, our health, our movements, our thoughts get turned into data points, the question for all of us becomes, what kind of guarantees should we demand in return? Differential privacy offers one really powerful, mathematically solid answer. And just understanding what it is the first step we can all take toward demanding a better and, frankly, a safer digital world.